She sat alone in the cramped, dimly lit broadcast booth, her fingers trembling over the microphone that had carried her voice across the Pacific for years. Outside, Tokyo was no longer the city she remembered. The streets were quieter now, not from peace, but from exhaustion. The war that once felt far away had crept into every corner of the country, leaving behind rubble, hunger, and the nervous silence of a nation waiting for news, good or bad. And in that tiny room, filled with static, cigarette smoke, and the weak hum of failing equipment, Tokyo rose, realized something she had feared for months. The United States was not surrendering. They were coming. For years, propaganda officials told her the same story. America is tired, America is weak. Your broadcasts are breaking their spirit. It was a lie she had been forced to repeat 1,000 times, a lie wrapped in cheerful music and sarcastic monologues, designed to make American soldiers feel hopeless. But as she scanned the latest reports scattered across her desk, she could no longer pretend. One line, typed in cold, emotionless ink, told the truth more clearly than any speech she had ever given. American forces advance without pause. The microphone in front of her felt heavier than usual. It wasn't just a piece of equipment anymore. It was a witness. A witness to the moment she finally understood that everything she had been ordered to say, every attempt to convince American troops that their homeland was collapsing, had failed. They weren't collapsing. They weren't afraid. They weren't pulling back. They were pushing forward with a force that even Japan's leaders could no longer deny. As the red on-air light flickered alive, she took a shaky breath. Her usual tone, playful, sarcastic, dripping with forced charm, suddenly felt impossible to summon. Her world had shifted, and for the first time in years, she could no longer hide behind the mask crafted for her. Her voice entered the airwaves softer than usual, trembling beneath the noise of distant bombs falling outside the studio walls. American soldiers listening from ships, tents, and muddy camps across the Pacific expected the usual routine. A mocking laugh, a joke about their sweethearts back home, a warning that their commanders were leading them to doom. Instead, they heard something else, a pause, a silence that didn't belong in propaganda. And then, quietly but clearly, she said the words that would echo far beyond the war, words that slipped out of her not because the script demanded it, but because truth had broken through the cracks. I see now. You're not turning back, are you? America isn't giving up. The men in the control room froze. This wasn't propaganda. This wasn't scripted. This was a confession, raw, unfiltered, dangerous. But she didn't stop. The weight of years, of manipulation, of being forced into a role she never wanted, pressed onto her chest until she could barely breathe. For so long, she felt trapped between two countries, two identities, two versions of herself. But in this moment, with the microphone warming beneath her palms, she finally let the truth surface. She spoke about the reports she had read, the American ships pushing through the Pacific like an unstoppable tide, the air raids growing more precise, the Japanese defenses weakening. She spoke with a voice that no longer tried to sound confident or clever. Instead, it sounded almost human. Outside, the low rumble of distant aircraft rolled through the city, causing the windows to tremble. She closed her eyes for a second. She had spent years sending her voice out to American soldiers, but now she wondered if any of them truly knew her, the real her. Not the myth, not the villain, not Tokyo Rose. Just a woman caught in a war she never wanted, saying words she never believed. And then, with a sudden clarity that cut through her fear, she said the line that would define the moment she realized the truth. You're not losing hope. You're gaining strength. And we can't stop you. No one in the studio dared to breathe. The engineers stared at her through the glass, their faces pale. These were words that could cost her everything, her job, her freedom. maybe even her life. But once spoken, they couldn't be pulled back. She continued, her voice low and steady, as if speaking directly to every American soldier tuning in across the vast ocean. She told them she could hear their determination in the reports, feel their momentum in every headline that reached her desk. She admitted that the broadcasts meant to break their spirit had done nothing. American troops were laughing at them, mocking them, refusing to be shaken. Instead of weakening their resolve, the broadcasts had become entertainment, background noise to their unstoppable advance. For years, she had been told she was powerful, that her voice carried the ability to sway armies. But now she understood the truth. Her words were dust against the steel force of a nation that refused to fold. The studio lights buzzed softly overhead, and she felt suddenly, painfully aware of how alone she was. Alone with her voice, alone with her conscience. The persona of Tokyo Rose was dissolving, leaving behind a woman who wanted only one thing: for the world to stop burning. She leaned closer to the microphone, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. "I thought America would break," she said, "but it seems you're only rising." Behind her, a bomb exploded somewhere in the city, a deep, trembling thud that shook dust from the ceiling. She didn't flinch, not anymore. Fear had become a companion she no longer reacted to. She ended the broadcast not with mockery, not with taunts, not with fake confidence, but with a final sentence that carried the full weight of everything she had just realized. "If you're hearing me tonight, then you already know the truth. This war will not end the way they promised us." And then she turned off the microphone. The room was silent. The war outside was not. And Tokyo Rose, for the first time since her voice had crossed the Pacific, understood that she had not been the one speaking to America. America had been speaking to her. The silence after the broadcast clung to her like a heavy coat. She sat motionless in the wooden chair, hands still resting on the microphone, as if afraid that moving even an inch would shatter the fragile moment she had just lived through. For years, she had spoken into this room without truly hearing herself. She had become a voice without a face, a symbol without a choice. But now she felt every word echoing back at her, louder than any air raid siren outside. The engineers behind the glass didn't move. Their eyes darted nervously, unsure whether to confront her or pretend it hadn't happened. They were used to her following the script exactly, not diverging into honesty that could be interpreted as subversion, disobedience, betrayal. In wartime Japan, even a whisper of doubt could be fatal. But she didn't care anymore. Something inside her had cracked open. She could feel the shift in her bones. As she stood, the smell of smoking wires filled the room. The aging broadcast equipment often overheated, especially during long transmissions. It reminded her of the country itself, overworked, exhausted, running on fading energy, but still pushing forward purely out of duty. She touched the metal frame of the microphone one last time. It was warm, almost painfully warm. Her voice had lived there. Her truth had spilled there. And now she wondered what consequences would follow. Outside the studio, the corridor was dimly lit. The emergency lamps flickered from the last air raid, and dust coated the floor like a thin layer of snow. Every footstep felt like a decision, forward, backward, or deeper into something she could never undo. She walked past office doors with peeling paint, where tired officials hunched over documents that promised a victory none of them truly believed in anymore. Their faces were etched with the same truth she had spoken on air, though they would never admit it out loud. When she stepped outside, the cool night air hit her like a reminder that the world was real, harsh, trembling under the weight of impending collapse. The city stretched before her in the half-light, a maze of darkened buildings, cracked pavement, and families hiding in shelters. Fires burned in the distance, painting the sky with a dull red glow. Tokyo no longer looked like a capital. It looked like a warning. She made her way through the narrow streets, pulling her coat tighter as the wind carried ash and whispers through the alleys. Everywhere she looked, she saw people pretending to be stronger than they were, mothers calming their children, soldiers marching even though their boots were worn, thin, elders staring at the sky as if hoping the clouds would bring peace instead of planes. She understood them now more than ever. She, too, had been pretending. Her voice had been a tool in a war machine, and she had convinced herself that reading the lines was just a job, just survival. But after tonight, she knew she could no longer hide behind that excuse. Her words had broken script. Her heart had broken silence. For the first time, she had spoken not as Tokyo Rose, but as a woman who had realized the truth. Japan was losing. America was not surrendering, and the war was accelerating toward an end that no one was ready to face. As she walked, she replayed her own broadcast in her mind. Every pause, every tremble, every sentence that slipped out with the weight of suppressed years. She wondered how many American soldiers had heard her. Had they paused in their barracks, leaning closer to the radio, sensing something different in her voice? Had they recognized her fear, her awakening? Or had they simply dismissed it as another strange moment in the endless noise of war? She would never know. But the possibility comforted and frightened her at the same time. She reached a small tea shop tucked between two damaged buildings. The owner, an elderly man with soft eyes and a quiet presence, nodded at her as she entered. He often stayed open late for soldiers and workers seeking a moment of warmth in the chaos. Tonight, the shop was nearly empty. A single lantern glowed above the counter, casting a golden halo over the steam rising from the kettle. She sat at her usual corner table, folding her hands in front of her. The old man approached her slowly, as if sensing the heaviness she carried. "You look like someone who has spoken too much tonight," he said gently. She let out a small breath, almost a laugh, almost a sigh. "I think for once I did." He did not ask for details. People no longer asked such questions. Curiosity in wartime was dangerous. Instead, he poured her a cup of hot tea and slid it across the table. The warmth seeped into her fingers as she held the cup, grounding her in a world that felt increasingly unstable. Outside, a distant boom rattled the windows. She didn't flinch. The shopkeeper didn't either. They had grown used to the language of explosions, the punctuation marks of war. "Do you ever wonder," she said softly, staring into the rising steam, "what it will feel like when all of this is over?" The man paused. Then he replied simply, "Everyone wonders. No one knows." She nodded. The truth of it lingered between them. As she sipped her tea, the reality of what she had done settled deeper into her. She had broken the facade. She had said the unsayable. She had acknowledged the unstoppable force of American persistence and the weakening state of the empire she lived in. It wasn't just a broadcast. It was a moment of rebellion, quiet, unintended, but powerful. She knew officials would hear about it. They always did. The broadcasts were monitored, transcribed, analyzed. Her deviation would not go unnoticed. She wondered what consequences awaited her. Interrogation, removal from her post, accusations of sabotage, or something worse. Yet a strange calm washed over her. Because despite everything, she felt lighter. The weight she had carried for years, the weight of pretending, of lying, of participating in something she never believed, had loosened its grip. She had spoken truth, even if only for a moment. She finished her tea slowly, savoring the warmth before stepping back into the cold night. The sky above Tokyo flickered with the glow of distant fires, but somewhere beyond that, far beyond the smoke, the fear, the ruins, she imagined the thousands of American soldiers marching, sailing, flying, refusing to break. Their resilience had reached her, not through speeches or bullets, but through the undeniable tide of reality. As she walked home, she wondered what she would say in her next broadcast. Would she be allowed to speak at all? Would she be punished, erased, replaced with another voice that carried none of her hesitation? But even if silence awaited her tomorrow, tonight she had done something honest, something dangerous, something human. And deep down, beneath the fear and the uncertainty, she felt the first flicker of something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Not for victory, not for Japan, not for the war, but for the truth. Because once truth begins to speak, it does not easily go quiet again. Not because of an alarm, nor the distant thud of explosions that often punctuated the early hours, but because of a feeling, a tightening in her chest, a whisper in her mind that something in the air had shifted. The night had not yet given way to morning, but the city felt restless, humming with a kind of anticipation that made the silence feel heavier than sound. She rose from her thin futon, wrapped a worn shawl around her shoulders, and stepped toward the small window of her room. The glass was cracked from a bombing weeks earlier, allowing a cold ribbon of air to slip inside. She pressed her palm against it anyway, staring out at the shadowed cityscape. Tokyo was still asleep, but not peacefully. The buildings stood like tired sentinels, scarred and leaning, waiting for whatever came next. For a long moment, she simply breathed. The memory of last night's broadcast still clung to her like smoke. The words she had spoken, the confession, the acknowledgement of American strength, the unintentional betrayal, replayed in her mind with painful clarity. She wondered how far those words had traveled, how many ears had heard them, how many hearts had felt them, and more importantly, who in this city had noticed. As she dressed and prepared to leave for the studio, she felt the weight of invisible eyes on her. Every step she took toward the street carried the question, had she gone too far? But the truth was that she no longer cared about consequences the way she once did. Something inside her had awakened. A voice deeper than the one she sent over the airwaves. A voice that belonged to her alone. The streets were nearly empty as she walked, her footsteps echoing off the walls. A pale glow in the east hinted at sunrise. Smoke hung low over the city, drifting like a restless spirit caught between worlds. She could hear the soft rumble of military trucks at a distance, engines growling like tired beasts. Tokyo was bracing itself again. As she neared the studio building, she noticed two men in military uniforms standing near the entrance. Their faces were hard, unreadable. Her heart tightened, but she forced her steps to remain steady. One of them glanced at her, then looked away. No interrogation, no accusation. Not yet. Relief washed through her, thin and temporary. Inside, the studio hallways buzzed with nervous energy. She expected stares, whispers, some sign that her broadcast had caused a disturbance. But instead, the staff moved quickly, quietly, avoiding eye contact. That silence worried her more than anger would have. Her producer, a stern woman with lines of fatigue etched into her face, approached her with a clipboard. "You'll have a shorter segment today," she said coldly. "Just music and light commentary. No improvisation." The warning wasn't spoken, but it was clear. She nodded. As she entered the booth, the stale smell of old equipment wrapped around her. The microphone stood in its usual place, a familiar presence that suddenly felt like a witness, a silent observer of everything she had revealed. She sat, adjusted her headphones, and waited for the signal light to blink alive. But before it did, something happened. A vibration shuddered through the building, so subtle she might have dismissed it, if not for what followed. A low roar rolled across the sky, deep and growing, like thunder that refused to end. She lifted her eyes to the window beside the booth, seeing the faint reflection of her own face. And then, the sudden flicker of something bright beyond the glass. The on-air light blinked on at the same moment. The world outside erupted. Bombs. Dozens of them. Explosions rippled across the far edge of the city, lighting the horizon with orange bursts of fire. The floor trembled. Ceiling dust fell like snow. Somewhere down the hall, someone screamed. Sirens began to wail, their long, haunting cries slicing through the chaos. But she didn't move. She didn't even breathe. Because in that moment, staring out at the sky torn open by fire, she understood with absolute clarity. This was the truth she had spoken. This was the proof. America wasn't surrendering. They were closing in. The timing was cruel, fateful, almost poetic. Her broadcast began in the middle of an air raid. She leaned toward the microphone, her voice steadier than her heartbeat. "This is Tokyo," she whispered, though she wasn't sure if her words were meant for the soldiers across the ocean or the trembling people beneath the bombs. "And the sky tonight is telling the truth we have tried to hide." Another explosion rattled the walls. She continued speaking, not with the practiced tone officials expected. Her voice trembled for only a moment, before something inside her hardened. Not with fear, not with loyalty to a collapsing regime, but with a strange and unexpected resolve. As the ground shook beneath her feet and the distant skyline flickered under the bombardment, she realized that the world outside the studio was finally saying what she had dared to speak the night before. The air raid was not just another attack. It was an undeniable message. The United States was not simply advancing. It was declaring that the end was near. The window pane rattled as another explosion tore through the city. This one closer, loud enough to momentarily drown out the static in her headphones. She placed both hands on the microphone, steadying herself as if anchoring her own heartbeat. The studio's overhead lights flickered, dimmed, then steadied again, struggling to hold the room together as the world outside threatened to tear it apart. She spoke again, her voice quieter but unbroken. "Tonight, the sky is louder than any broadcast I could ever give." In the control room behind the glass, chaos erupted. Engineers rushed to their stations, shouting orders, attempting to stabilize the signal, to keep the power from dying. Yet not a single one dared to storm into the booth. Perhaps they knew, or perhaps they feared, that whatever she was saying was beyond their control now. A force of truth had overtaken her, and no one wanted to stand in its path. The ceiling creaked ominously as dust rained down onto her script pages. She brushed them aside. She no longer needed them. "For months," she continued, her words flowing with an honesty that surprised even her, "we were told the Americans would tire. We were told they would lose heart. But listen to the sky. They have not tired. They have not slowed. They have not surrendered." Another explosion thundered, shaking the microphone. She inhaled deeply and spoke over the sound. "And tonight, neither will I." She wasn't sure who she was speaking to anymore. Soldiers on faraway islands, Americans crossing the Pacific, Japanese civilians huddled in shelters, or perhaps herself. But the truth poured out of her like water from a cracked vessel, unstoppable now that the seal had finally broken. Outside, the wail of the air raid sirens grew louder, their mournful cry echoing across the rattling streets. The bombing intensified, each strike glowing brighter across the window. Buildings roared as they crumbled. Yet, in the booth, she remained seated, grounded by the microphone and the necessity of her voice. "If you are listening," she whispered, "know this. The war is no longer a battle of strength. It is a battle of truth, and truth is arriving on wings." She didn't expect emotion to rise in her, but it did, swelling from deep inside her chest. For years, she had been forced to taunt American soldiers, to paint them as weak, naive, lost. Yet here they were, proving their endurance not through her broadcasts, but through the sky itself. And here she was, finally acknowledging the reality she had been forbidden to admit. Suddenly, the studio door flew open. A man in uniform stood in the doorway, his face red with urgency. Not anger, urgency. He pointed at her sharply and shouted through the noise, "Stop the broadcast now!" But she didn't move. She kept speaking as if she hadn't heard him. As he stepped forward to grab her arm, the building shook again, violently this time. A bomb detonated somewhere close enough that the shockwaves swept through the studio like a gust of furious wind. Papers flew across the room. The lights flickered out for a moment, plunging the booth into darkness. The soldier stumbled backward against the wall, losing his footing. She felt the microphone slip forward and grasped it tightly, refusing to let the moment be silenced. "When the truth arrives," she said into the darkness, "it does not knock. It breaks the door down." The emergency generator kicked in, humming weakly, as the lights returned with a sickly yellow glow. The soldier, still regaining his balance, lunged toward her again. This time, 2 engineers rushed in and held him back. Not to help her, but to keep him from damaging the equipment. "Let her finish," one of them shouted. The soldier's eyes narrowed with fury and confusion, but the engineers didn't release him. They too knew the weight of what was happening. They too had heard the lies, felt the fear, sensed the inevitability. Maybe in this one moment, they wanted the truth to speak before everything collapsed. She continued speaking with a calm that defied the chaos around her. "America is not surrendering," she said, "and tonight, neither are the people who deserve the truth." Her voice softened. "We were told they would beg for mercy, but they march. We were told they would retreat, but they rise. We were told they would fear us, but it is we who fear what comes next." She paused as another explosion echoed like a closing chapter. "But fear," she whispered, "is not the enemy." Silence is. For a moment, the sky outside grew eerily quiet, as if the bombers had passed, leaving behind only smoke, fire, and the heavy weight of their message. She leaned closer to the microphone, finishing what she felt might be her last free broadcast. "If this is the night the world changes," she said, every word carved from the deepest part of her, "then let it be said that I finally spoke honestly. Not as a symbol, not as a voice created by war, but as a witness to the truth. America does not surrender, and neither do those who finally dare to speak." She released the microphone. The on-air light blinked off. Silence filled the room. Outside, the city continued burning. Inside, she felt strangely calm, because the truth, once spoken, could no longer be taken back. The studio felt impossibly still after the broadcast ended, as if the walls themselves were absorbing the weight of her words. The emergency lights cast a dim, amber glow across the booth, illuminating the dust that still drifted from the trembling ceiling. The soldier, who had tried to stop her, was breathing hard, his uniform smeared with powder and debris. The engineers stared at her through the cracked glass window, silent, pale, and stunned. But she did not look at them. She stared at the microphone, as if it were a living thing, as if its silver frame still held the echo of her voice. It had carried laughter, fear, lies, and now truth. It had been her prison for years. And tonight, impossibly, it had also become her freedom. The soldier finally snapped out of his shock. He stormed toward her again, grabbing her arm roughly. "You don't understand what you've done," he hissed, pulling her toward the door. But she did. She understood perfectly. The truth had consequences, inescapable ones, and now they were coming for her. He dragged her into the hallway, his boots striking the floor with sharp, angry thuds. The building still shook occasionally, dust falling in soft clouds from overhead. Somewhere outside, the fires burned unhindered, casting a strange glow through shattered windows. It felt less like a city, and more like a fevered dream unraveling. As the soldier pushed her forward, a group of staff members watched from a distance, some fearful, some ashamed, some quietly grateful. No one stepped forward to defend her. No one dared. Her fate was sealed, and everyone knew it. When they reached a stairwell, the soldier paused, gripping her arm with iron fingers. "Why did you do it?" he demanded, breath heavy. "Why speak such treason during an attack?" She met his eyes, steady despite the fear churning in her stomach. "Because the truth arrived," she said softly, "whether we speak it or not." His jaw clenched, but he said nothing more. He shoved her forward again. Outside, the city was chaos. Buildings had collapsed into the streets. Fires climbed the sides of wooden homes like hungry animals. People ran past them, some screaming, some silent. All changed. The bombs had not just destroyed structures. They had cracked the illusion of invincibility that had kept Japan suspended in denial. The soldier forced her into the back of a truck filled with uniformed men. She sat among them, gripping the edge of the wooden seat as the vehicle lurched forward. No one looked at her. No one spoke to her. She was not a broadcaster now, not Tokyo Rose, not a propaganda tool. She was a liability. As the truck rumbled deeper into the city, she watched the destruction unfold like a moving tapestry outside the slats of the truck walls. Flames danced on rooftops. Children clung to their mothers, covered in ash. Soldiers barked orders into the night, their voices sharp with desperation. It was the first time she saw Tokyo not as a home or a duty, but as a wounded, dying place struggling to stay upright. Hours passed. The bombing faded. A brittle silence settled across what remained of the city. The truck eventually stopped outside a government building that had survived the night, though barely. Stone steps were cracked, windows blown out, and smoke drifted from somewhere inside. She was escorted into a dimly lit room with a single wooden table and a chair. She sat. She waited. And waited. Finally, a high-ranking officer entered, his uniform immaculate despite the devastation outside. He stood across from her, arms folded behind him, eyes cold and analytical. "You went off script," he said. "Twice." She didn't respond. "You admitted weakness. You praised the enemy's strength. Do you understand the magnitude of this betrayal?" She looked at him, not defiantly, not angrily, but with a weary clarity. "I spoke what everyone already knows." His eyes narrowed. "The people don't need truth. They need stability." She shook her head slowly. "They need honesty, or they will drown under lies." He slammed his hand onto the table, the crack echoing through the room. "You do not decide what the people need," she flinched, but only slightly. "You've become dangerous," he continued. "Your voice carries farther than your loyalty. We cannot allow you to influence the outcome of this war." She whispered, "There is no outcome left." The officer froze. Her words struck him like a blow. The silence between them grew heavy. Finally, he gestured to the guards. "Take her away." They led her out of the building and into a small detention room, bare, cold, lit by a single flickering bulb. She sat on the wooden floor, hugging her knees, feeling the weight of exhaustion settle into her bones. For the first time in years, she felt truly alone. Not in the false isolation of a studio booth, but in the real, suffocating solitude of someone who had spoken truth in a world built on denial. Hours passed. Or perhaps it was days. Time blurred. The air outside changed. First heavy with smoke, then eerily still, then trembling with yet another distant rumble. She couldn't see the sky, but she knew it was shifting. The war was turning. The walls themselves seemed to know it. One morning, the door opened without warning. A guard stepped inside. But he didn't look angry. He looked confused. "You're being released," he muttered. She stared at him. "Released? Why?" He shook his head. Orders changed. Everything is changing. Just go. She stepped out into the hallway, blinking at the sudden light. The building was in disarray. Officers rushed around carrying documents. Radios blared with frantic messages. The atmosphere crackled with a strange mix of fear and inevitability. Something monumental had happened, and then she heard it. A single sentence broadcast over the loudspeakers. The Emperor has surrendered. Her breath caught. Her heart stopped. The war was over. The truth she had spoken in fear, in trembling, in defiance, had finally arrived in full. People around her froze. Some collapsed to their knees. Some wept. Some stared into nothing with hollow disbelief. She felt tears gather in her eyes, not from sadness or relief, but from the overwhelming realization that everything she had been forced to say had led to this moment of impossible clarity. She stepped outside into the ruined streets of Tokyo. Smoke drifted upward like restless spirits. The sun was rising, casting a pale wash of gold across the wreckage. For the first time in years, she felt the world breathing. She walked slowly, silently, her steps light on the fractured ground. The war had taken her voice, her freedom, her identity. But it had also given her something unexpected, a moment of truth, a moment when she realized that even the smallest voice, even one trapped in lies, could find its way to honesty. And as she moved through the broken city, she whispered to herself, "They will remember what I said, even if they never know my name." And with that, the voice known as Tokyo Rose faded into history. Not as a villain, not as a traitor, but as a witness to the truth the world had long refused to face.